Come on, Bob, be more professional.
Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about your position in the world, Vandal, so I know
My position.
who I'm talking to.
Um,
Political or like location?
Not location, but your politics, your interests, more specifically, what you produce and consume.
All
let's
right.
see. Who am I? I am currently. I live in Canada, in Ontario.
Oh,
Yes, I work. I work at a warehouse, which it's strange for me to say that because considering I think I would have maybe a higher paying or more academic job, but it seems that physical labor has been there's something about it that eases the mind that I appreciate.
yeah.
So I found myself in physical labor, which is it's very strange. As for politics, I've moved around quite a lot from where I'd originally started. I was originally like a far leftist, feminist, social justice warrior, and I've completely broken the mold from that point. I have gone, I wouldn't say the opposite direction, but maybe a more pragmatic and reasonable direction.
And what initiated that movement?
It was research. It was absolutely 100% research. I think it was my original political position was a product of ignorance. I hadn't exactly looked into the truth about any of these claims. They just they felt right, and it crafted a narrative that accorded with, I suppose, my predispositions.
Mm-hmm.
But when I began to study them, that's when it completely devastated everything. In particular, it was I actually came through men's rights activism.
Okay.
Their take on feminism I found to be quite poignant, and it kicked me out. And so now, value-wise, this is something that Bob has a little bit of contention with. Value-wise, I would consider myself to be a libertarian of like a right wing bent. However, I recognize that this does probably not operate so well in the grand scheme of things as like a national level. So I would say politically, I'm centrist.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a little weird.
No, I think that's a refined viewpoint.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
to be able to hold one's values and then to change them according to the scale of the issue.
Yeah, it seems to me that politics has to do with it's like a self-sustaining mode of human interaction. So I recognize that my values aren't necessarily going to be self-sustaining; they're just my own desires, and not everyone can pursue them to the same extent, or even the same, or even with the same sort of ethical or moral content that I put on them. So it's not going to work. Yeah. So Bob, how about you?
I've always been a centrist. My whole life. Grew up as an inventor. My family is full of engineers, so
Oh, cool.
sort of investigate everything from the base, but also look forward into what could be. So that pretty much puts me in the center of, at least ideologically, and so that sort of overflows into the political realm. Yep, and I'm in the United States, so that's fun.
Oh, is it?
Sometimes. I live in a very democrat state.
Oh, yeah.
So
East
my
or
views
west?
aren't very centric, in the middle of the United States,
Oh,
pretty
okay.
much.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, Ben, where would you place yourself since we've all gone and aired our dirty laundry here?
Jeez. Politically?
Yeah.
On a national level?
Yes.
I'm still trying to figure that out. I thought it was one way, and then doing all this research, I really don't know what to think on a national level. I've always kind of not been able to make up my mind with regards to politics because I see it from a psychological standpoint, and that most of it is informed and motivated by deeper characteristics than that which are articulated, and that the articulations of our politics are usually a cartoonish version, or there's some sort of compromise between our feelings and then our guesses about things. I think that I find the political sphere so incredibly complex that I haven't been able to really carve a place out for myself. Now, I'm sure that other people just talking to me and getting me open up would be able to tell me where I align with different camps and stuff, but just off the cuff, I really don't know. I think I'm a pretty staunch or a radical centrist at this point. I think that's what I want to project onto the discussion right now, like a radical centrism.
Now, by radical, do you mean that it is, say, extreme with regard to what would be considered, I suppose, the norm? Or is it more of a radicalism of consistency?
That's a great question, because I mean radical in the root term of that which is the root, of getting to the heart of the matter, and to taking in a bunch of data and seeing that there is a wide spectrum of perspectives and a wide spectrum of intentionalities involved in that, and try to articulate the contest or the compromise in such a way that it provides more growth and more refinement. I'm talking very general, so I don't know how to articulate that in a particular sort of stance. I guess we can talk about something.
Yes, I found that rather well said, actually. Looking at intentionality and the distinction between someone's intentions and ideals, there can be such a disconnect, and there is a gap between the reconciliation of what you desire with what you how you're going to bring it about. Mm-hmm. That it seems no one really knows for certain how in the world you can attempt to manifest your ideals in a way that is comparable or optimal within the society that you live in. Now, Bob, do you want to give our mission statement here? What is our project been for the last forever?
Is there a title?
A title?
Not quite.
Or a fraternity?
A mission statement, I suppose.
Yeah, a quick synopsis. So we're trying to decrypt the left's language and logic patterns, which necessitates that we also decrypt the libertarian positions as well. And when looking at the libertarians' position, we're also not necessarily just looking at the logic and language patterns, but we're also looking at how they operate in coordination with authoritarian in terms of how people implement their ideas, how they want them implemented on full scale, social kind of scope. If you watch any far left people debate with people that are what's like classical liberals, or you just conservatives on the right, you'll see that they basically talk past one another, where each side thinks the other side is just dumb, or just doesn't like people and are trying to gain control. Both positions seem to feel this way, but the thing that we noticed is that they literally are using a different language and logic pattern. And so they both believe they are correct, but they both can't understand the other side because they're just operating in a completely different way. So just because the words sound the same, just because the sentences are put together in relatively the same way, doesn't mean that the interpretations or the expressions are going to match. And so when we found that there is this left-right dichotomy, there is a spectrum in there, of course, but so that just is more of an intensity kind of thing, with some interesting side effects from the different intensities. We also find that there are differences in patterns for libertarian and authoritarian as well. And then when you coordinate these, left, right, and libertarian, authoritarian, you get an interesting mix, which complicates things even further. But the most things that people see is the left-right dichotomy, because that tends to be on the authoritarian side, where most libertarians tend to be more, let things just be. So you won't really see a whole lot of fighting between libertarian left and libertarian right. They're sort of just like, hey, let's everybody do their own thing, just with different set of principles, where the authoritarians are like, hey, we want everybody to do this thing. We're very confident in our position. And that's where you see this clashing of language and logic patterns. So we want to be able to get each side to understand the other side by creating this framework that we can get people to basically learn a different language, the other political languages, so that they can properly speak, effectively speak to the other positions and also interpret the other side as well. Because when you're learning a language, you're not learning just how to talk, you're learning how to listen as well.
So do you think that, those two camps have an equal claim to truth? Not claim, but an equal truth value once you break down and translate their different modes of expression? Do you find that it's that they have both the equal amount of truth, or you see one more fantasy or certain extremes more fantastical than others?
Well, so you can't have both really existing in reality too well. But what we're really talking about here is that the principles or the driving forces behind their logic and language patterns are consistent because they believe those things to be true. Mm-hmm. So truth, however, gets down into things like justified true belief, where using justification needs to be somewhere along the lines of how science operates, where you have like double-blind studies, etc. So you don't get Gettier problem effects out of it, where you get false justifications. But the thing is that both the left and the right do have issues once you get near the boundaries. What we found is that when you get near the boundaries of the political map, on any of the edges, authoritarian, libertarian, left, right, you end up in basically a zone of unfeasibility, a zone of unoptimized scenarios where things just start to break down. But we also see that a large bit of the realism would be on the right, and the left would be more idealism.
The way I phrase it is there's a different way of processing thought and developing belief. On that creates what we call like a leftist persuasion and a rightist persuasion. And the more you stick with that process, the more consistent you are with that process, the more radical you tend to become, or the more radical, I should say, you will become. Now, the issue is that both these modes of processing thought have some merit in different circumstances. They are not absolutes. If you treat them as though you must adhere to one or the other, and that it produces a universality of truth, that this is the correct way to do something, it is an absolute unmitigated disaster. There is simply no way to operate on any of these processes completely consistently, like just choosing one of them, and produce both the ideal state or the optimized state for the nation, but as well as even trying to manifest your ideals. You will not be able to produce them. Basically, all extremes end in failure.
So I've been talking to Brett Weinstein. He has this idea very similar to that of utopia as being impossible, because of the way that the way he defines utopia or utopianism is that you take one value and you maximize that one value, and at a certain point there's diminishing returns where everything other than that value causes the whole system to collapse. So there's a system of trade-offs that you constantly have to be going through to affect the way that you want, I guess, the world to run. I guess I'm an idealist in a lot of ways and a realist in a lot of other ways. And I think politics, especially theoretical politics, I still don't know enough about what the project is even supposed to be about, other than, just sustaining a certain level of stability for people to live their lives. or to increase the value of their production, and then the value of their living circumstances, right? Their standards
Right.
of living.
So if I were to say the simplest terms, what the goal of the project is, or what we're attempting to do, is we are attempting to take politics as and set a political model for it, but break it down past politics and go into the structure of belief itself.
Yeah.
So how belief is formed, and then how that comes to manifest in different political outcomes, both in your beliefs, but also in your predispositions toward the left or the right, or authoritarian, libertarian.
Yeah.
That's the plan, and it appears that we've made some inroads in that regard.
Oh, really?
Yes, and that's why I was when you contacted me, I was very hopeful and happy to share it with you. It was in the context of Karen Strawn, whom I love. I love her. She presented conflict theory, and if I remember correctly, I said that conflict theory is it's more of a, like, say you were to take someone who we'll say is on the left and has this certain mode of processing thought. Their justification for why they believe what they do is what I would call conflict theory. It's how they present their understanding. In that way, it would be flawed. It's like a drunk. It's more like an addict telling you that, like, I can quit any time. No, you can't. You are what's the word? You are
Wired that way.
Compromised.
Huh.
You're compromised by this belief, and it predisposes you to justify your beliefs in this particular way.
Yeah.
Therefore, you develop conflict theory.
What about the right? Is there an analog to conflict theory for extreme right extremism or fascism or whatever it's called?
Absolutely. It tends to be more fractionalized, more disparate, just through the individualism you get on the right. So there are many different iterations of this. But essentially, the different version on the right, everything will trend, if given enough time, toward a single mode of thought, a single operation in reality, a single standard for a nation. Which is why you get a lot of tyranny and dictatorship occurring out of what I would call, like, the authoritarian right, the far right. As for a specific theory, it would be difficult to say, because, again, it's very individualistic. So you could treat certain aspects of fundamentalist Christianity in this way, especially during certain times in history. But you could also do it with Islam, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fascinated. Part of the reason, or part of my justification for thinking literature is such a big deal, is because, my quick and dirty theory about it is that
Go ahead.
what a text or a story is that it's a process of the storyteller capturing your attention. Well, okay, first eliciting your attention, capturing your attention, sustaining your attention, and then modulating your attention. And so when the storyteller, after you enter into that story, what he's doing, or what they're doing, is planting these images into your head and articulating those images within a field of event, and usually centered around one or maybe two or three, in basic fiction, just one character, right? So we are able to, our attention goes into that vessel of the character and then is sustained through that interaction between the character and the environment. Now, what happens is that our attention is thickened into a form of rudimentary form of belief. And there's this guy who smoked a lot of opium back in the 19th century named Coleridge. And he said that fiction is the process of reading or fiction is the willful suspension of disbelief. Right. So his theory was that you suspend your disbelief in this fantasy, and then you ride along with the fantasy or the fiction or the poem. You willfully suspend your disbelief. I think that he's right, but he's absolutely wrong. Is that what you're doing is tentatively investing your belief into that narrative structure, into that story. Now, what a system of belief is. with regards to religion, with the cool thing about religion is that the story is on the surface. The problem I have with politics is that the story is hidden under all this terminology. But the cool thing about conflict theory is one way of just saying, okay, this is the basic story of the left. There's the oppressed and the oppressor, and that's basically the story of it. But what we have with a system of belief is that it's a very rudimentary story. It's got it has inherent inbuilt tensions, and those tensions keep our attention going along with the story and keep on generating belief. And then what we do is we project that story onto the data of our experience. So we use these narrative frameworks in order to basically to overstand reality, overstand just that wash of event and what's going on. And for instance, with Christianity and Judeo-Christianity, you have a beginning, and then you have the fall, and then you have this middle, and then you have the end, which is this ascension. And Northrop Frye, who was this Canadian literary critic, he talks about the Bible having a smiley face arc, where you have we start at a high point, and then we fall, and then we get back up to the top. So if we can analyze, if we can analyze or translate this is kind of my sub-project with going through Evergreen and starting to reach out into the left and social justice and what's going on there, how it does make sense, because I don't think it's necessarily logical so much as it's narrative, narratological. So if you can extract it down into the components of the story, basically say that there's a character that's organizing all data and always seeing and projecting this sort of dynamic, this sort of dramatic dynamic into every given event, every given policy, every given this, and that, and that. So the problem with any given system of belief is that if it's not refined enough, such as Christianity, I think it was worked on, and Judeo-Christianity has been worked on for thousands of years by many, many, many different people, so that there's a wide enough breadth in it that if you don't necessarily become fundamental, you can still live out a very rich existence through that larger narrative framework encoded in the Bible. But the problem with something like Marxism is that, and I'm just shooting from the hip here, and I'm totally willing to be corrected, but Marxism or intersectionality or conflict theory is that it's not necessarily, it's got such a small pantheon of gods, it has such a small number of different characters that can live out within that, so that it forces everybody to start to act in a certain way, or start to gravitate towards like one ideal character type, which I don't think is necessarily expansive so much as constrictive. I think there are simplistic narratives that can give you like the monomyth, right? Like the Luke Skywalker, there's a hero, he's got a bad dad, he's got to overthrow the dad, and then he's the king, and then he becomes the bad dad and he dies, or whatever like that. There's certain very basic rudimentary narratives that we can internalize on a very subconscious level. We embed them in a subconscious level that can be very generative and very healthy for a large swath of people. If everybody believes in the same thing, the net outcome of that is diversity of opinion, is diversity of output, and then is efficiency and just a constant increase of productivity and and so on. I'm going to pause there. I could keep on going, but go on.
Yeah, no, that was actually pretty fantastic. I have the same opinion about Judeo-Christianity as well. The idea that it has evolved over so many years, and this evolution is basically people trying out different interpretations, and then what worked or what worked best has been passed down. We want to create like a left to right dictionary, like a translation guide, so people can finally understand a lexicon. The way people can finally understand what someone means when they say like something as simple as like identity. Which technically isn't that simple, but
yeah. Well, that's interesting because if you can do that, then people can have deeper conversations. But I think the argument's just going to go down one step. I think with the case of identity is that you have different people using it in different ways, and the way that they're using something like identity. Well, I guess I'm just restating what you've already discovered or been describing is that
Mhm,
there are these fundamental, I guess, axioms of both processes, right? Especially what I've
Yeah.
been thinking about very specifically this week is like, okay, there is internal coherence within the left or the radical left, the social justice movement. What are can we map it out? So what are the basic assumptions? What are the 5 basic Euclidean axioms of this method of thought? We can get to there, and then we can see how all that argumentation works together.
Yeah, precisely. That's how I came into it originally before I met Bob. I was trying to decrypt social justice, and I just kept hammering it, try to get to the most simple, fundamental axiom I could possibly get to describe it in its entirety.
What is it?
I thought of it like self-replicating code, like the simplest piece of code you could write that would actually begin to rewrite itself and then produce all the effects you would see in this case in what was social justice. Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm after.
What is it?
Oh boy.
So this was where the actual conversation was scheduled for.
Yeah, I figured there'd be like a bit of a preamble to this. Where to start? Bob and I had discussed, like if we started at the very beginning, like the very, 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 very beginning, it would become awfully philosophical and semantic. So we figured there's a bit more utility in explaining what I think the fundamental axiom is, where it comes, like what it is, not exactly where it comes from, but to show how if you take this one axiom, if you take it, how you can develop postmodernism, neo-Marxism, everything from that. Even the explosion in the transgenderism, the concept of otherkin, you've heard of this? Yeah, everything from this one axiom. Before, I'd broken it down to, I think there was 3, and then 2, and then I had 1. And I was like, there's no way it could possibly be 1. But then after talking with Bob, it seems that there might just be 1. We talked about before the idea that the left and the right have a different means of processing thought. And this way of processing it, of developing a belief, is it's by virtue of 2 separate axioms. So the right has their own, and the left has their own. And this creates their one most significant distinction. Because without this, they would be basically the same. And you wouldn't have a left-right dichotomy or spectrum. The simplest, you have to think, what is the simplest thing you can possibly believe about a belief? Kind of a strange way to look at it. What is the simplest way, not necessarily logical, not justified, the simplest way in your own mind to justify something that you believe? And we're looking into it. And it seems it's a form of a priori justification, which means it's not based on experience, it's not based on empirical evidence, it's not based on any sort of thing in reality. It is just a claim that exists, well, axiomatically. So your use of axiom is right on the nose. This is what they are, and they're going to sound silly and trite and kind of stupid. But I think that's because they are sort of silly, trite, and kind of stupid. The first axiom, for on the left, we're talking about the left in particular, their axiom that informs their justification, I am not wrong. So, and you think like, oh, what the hell does that even mean, right? That doesn't really appear to make any sense. It is the claim of belief that one does not hold to a falsehood. Now the contrary claim is I am right. It is a claim that one holds to a truth. Now again, I'm going to avoid going into the whole philosophical semantic thing, blah, blah, blah. Take these 2 axioms for granted. I am right and I'm not wrong. Now, this isn't something like this. It's not something such as, it's not something like I'm not wrong. Like if you were to come up to me and present to me a claim of some sort, I could retort and say, well, I'm not wrong about that. And you would naturally inquire, well, what is it that you believe then? Of course, right? But the interesting thing is that while you would ask that, and of course you would, because you'd want to know what you believe in its stead, technically speaking, I do not need to believe anything in its stead in order to reject your claim. It's not logical to do this. It's not rational. It's not empirical, but I can yet do this. So what this ends up creating is this very strange relationship to what we call affirmative belief, which is I am right, and nullification, or nullified belief, a null belief, which is I am not wrong. So here's an example. You can see this play out. Take the topic of the age of the Earth. So here you're presented with the age of the Earth. What does someone on the right, someone who's using affirmation, what does he say about the age of the Earth? Well, he will tell you that he is right about the age of the Earth, which is an interesting thing about being right. Is it a claim? It is a claim of truth. It is a claim of knowledge, of possession of something. So when he says, I am right about the age of the Earth, it implies that he has set something in there, some criterion that determines his rightness. In this case, when he says, I am right about the Earth, it would continue on by saying, because I believe the Earth is 5,000 years old, something like that. Of course, we know, or we suspect, the Earth isn't actually 5,000 years old. That's silly. It's probably several, what is it, like 3 billion or million or something like that. But what's to note about this sort of affirmative belief is that when he says, I am right about a topic, given any topic, he must substitute a criterion that he is correct about. That is what justifies his belief. He believes he is right about the age of the Earth because he believes something about it. In this case, that it has an age, that it is 5,000 years old. Now this, I imagine that this sort of thinking seems almost natural. If I were to ask you, what do you believe about, what do you believe about, I don't know, it could be anything. What do you believe about the evolution of man? You will give me some sort of topic. You will give me criteria. This is what I believe, and because I believe this, this is correct. This is correct because I have a belief about it. You're not going to present to me a belief that you believe you're wrong about. You may suspect it. It may be a matter of probabilities. But in the end, if you believe it, you believe that it's right. Otherwise, you would believe something differently. Where I'm not wrong comes in, and it's bizarre, is that given the same topic about the age of the Earth, he will not make an affirmative claim. What he will do instead is he will attempt to nullify any claim that others have presented in his effort to be, quote unquote, not wrong. So in this example, he would say, I am not wrong about the age of the Earth because I don't believe that it's 5,000 years old. Because the interesting thing about not being wrong is not that it doesn't imply that you hold to any other belief, anything in the affirmative. You don't hold to a standard for what it means to be a woman or a standard for the age of the Earth or anything like that. It's just that you do not hold to a belief about it at all. Or how are you doing so far? I just want to make sure, because this is where the weirdness is. So
yeah, well, I mean that's a weird place for the weirdness to be, right at the heart of the matter. But I want to see where the weirdness is going to go. I mean, I see correlates in conversations that I've had.
Yeah, so you have this idea where this person who would be on the right, he's right about something because he has a criterion, and someone on the left is not wrong because he doesn't have a criterion. Now, you've used the terms affirmation and nullification to explain like this relationship, but there's two terms that work in synergy with each other as a process. For affirmation, we use the term standardization. So someone on the right, when they have a belief, it is an expression of having a standard. If you ask them what they believe about anything, they will give you a standard. What do you believe about women? They will present to you their standard. What do you believe about anything? They will have a standard. They will have set criteria. And it creates a rigidity of standards at a larger level, right? This is exactly what it means to be a woman, or this is exactly what it means to be humble. This is exactly how you must behave in church or pray to God, anything like that. It creates it's very criterial in its belief structure. The left, they do something completely different. Again, when presented with a belief, with a claim, such as like someone on the right would say, this is exactly what it means to be a woman, they will say that is not relevant to being a woman. They will not hold a belief. They will not hold a criterion necessary to being, in this case, a woman. Because they, in their effort to be not wrong, to hold that as their fundamental axiom, they cannot hold any sort of standard for it at all. Now, this seems strange, right? Because if you look at the generally on the left, they will have all sorts of different ideas about what it means to be a woman. Granted, 100% granted, I understand that. And this is because this ability to standardize, or the opposite in the case of the left, which is called nebulization, to make something more nebulous, more meaningless, more ambiguous. This process is just that. It's a process. You don't go from believing, say if you're a traditionalist conservative, you don't go from believing that this is exactly what a woman must be in belief, behavior, purpose, outcome in biology, and then suddenly completely nullify that, get rid of it completely. You don't do anything like that. That would be madness, to just completely eliminate a concept. It's a gradual process. So what you do is, say in the case of woman, which provides a fantastic example, we can look at what feminism had done throughout its, I guess you could call it its infamous career. You had originally a standard for what a woman was. It was supposed to be, exactly this, exactly that. This is their role in society. This is the outcome they ought to produce. Otherwise, they're not being a real woman. They're not living up to the standard. And so what the left, or the feminists at that point, decided to do was they were going to liberate from what women from what they saw as oppressive sex roles, things like that. But in their effort to do this, they made it so that you didn't need to believe anything in order to be a woman. Then you didn't need to behave a certain way in order to be a woman. Then you didn't need to fulfill a particular purpose. Then you didn't have to produce any outcome at all in order to be a woman. And then we're at the tip of the spear now, where they're removing biology from what it means to be a woman. What they've done is they've actually entirely nebulized the prior standard. They've removed every single criterion they can until they're left with what I call a hollow term. You can claim to be a woman, you can self-identify, but you can't say how you are that. It's very strange. And you can see this, like that is one of the quintessential examples. And you can see this with what happens if you are, say, a feminist of any stripe who chooses to set a single criterion as necessary to what it means to be a woman. If you do, even the smallest bit, you are setting a standard. And if you set a standard, you're operating on the axiom of the right. And the people on the left, the radical left especially, the more consistent with their axiom, they will pick up on this and you will be ostracized. You are gone. They will actually call you a conservative. Because what you've attempted to do is you've gone against the axiom. You've gone against their way that they justify their belief. You're not nebulizing anymore. Now you're standardizing. So intense examples come in the form of TERFs. Do you know what TERFs are?
Yeah. There was some TERF couple at Evergreen a couple of years ago.
Right, and for the sake of anyone who may listen to this, a TERF is a trans-exclusionary radical feminist. And it's amazing, because the only thing they really do is they've set a single criterion for what it means to be a woman. They will not nebulize the criterion for biology. They will say you must at least be biologically female in order to be a woman as we understand it. And for that reason, social justice, I consider that to be like the tip of the spear. They have ostracized them. They've gone against them. They treat them as radicals, as evil, as barbaric, as awful. Because what they've done is they've set a single standard. And you can see this in other things as well. Race is another one. Before, say, 1900s, there was in the West, there was a particular standard for what it meant when someone said black. There was awful, indisputably racist, bigoted. I understand that. So there were particular expectations you would have of blacks, particular intentions you'd have for them, different beliefs and behaviors that you'd expect of them, things like that. They had standardized what it meant to be black. So if you're black, you are this, and it creates prejudicial belief. So seeing this as oppressive and evil and bad, it began to get nebulized too. So now we're at the point, it's very interesting, where someone will claim, I am a black man. It's like, okay, but now I can't standardize that in terms of belief. It doesn't mean you believe anything in particular. It doesn't mean you behave in a certain way. It doesn't mean that you have a particular purpose or you produce a particular outcome. It doesn't mean that you even have a particular culture. And now it's gotten to the point, again, tip of the spear with social justice, where it's not even a biology. It's not even genetic, because you have people claiming to be transracial. They have actually removed exactly every single criterion that black could mean. And now, again, just like woman at the tip of the spear of social justice, it's left to be this term that you can merely declare for yourself, right? I am a woman, but now it's lost meaning.
I want to challenge you, maybe.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's this phrase that was popular, and now it's an anathema. It's called "I don't see race."
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
And that's something that Evergreen explicitly calls out as something that's wrong, because you marginalize people by stripping them of their racial identity. By not seeing race, you are willfully stripping somebody else of their claims to identity. It seems that within the identity politics intersectional spheres, that these identities are still very much clung to, especially at Evergreen.
Yes.
Within this, I think it's called Black Bloc, or this.
I've heard of Black Bloc. I'm not sure if it's specifically black, but yes.
Okay, so I don't know. I'm still trying to figure. Well, maybe that's Antifa. I don't know, because Antifa wears black, so it's kind of confusing. But within the documents, like with regards to the student demands, so the students had this big thing, and then they gave the president their demands, and everybody caucused into their different racial identities or different identities, and they came back and they presented all their demands. And what floated to the top of the demands is that there's this racial hierarchy. I think it's progressive stacking is the current term this week, but at the very top term is the trans black disabled person, and then after that is the black people, and then after that is the other races, the other brown folk, and then after that is the white folk who have a marginality, the disabled and stuff, and then all the way at the bottom is these other things. So it seems like there's still very much, at least in order to mobilize, in order to articulate their power, they still need these solid identities, these identifiers. So how does that work into your axiom of nebulization?
This is that happens a little bit later in the process. I'm wondering if I can integrate it now.
You were headed there anyway.
Oh yeah, it comes right up. The thing to note about it for now is that with regard to that idea of still holding on to the identity, right? Because they're like I said, they're nebulizing it, and you think, why would they still hold to it? The identity is not lost. In fact, it becomes more fervorous in the attempt to claim its existence, to increase its influence, so that other people think it matters, that it's important, that it's existent, and that comes as a natural consequence of having no ability for them to affirm it themselves, because they have lost all the ability to do it themselves. Like they, through no effort of their own, can they prove that they're black. They can believe it, but what could they do? They can't claim it as a result of their genetics. They can't claim it through their belief, their behavior, anything like that. What you end up getting is you get these people who can only see their identity as being the target of someone else's actions. It creates this interesting, it's almost like you become a reactive agent, a non-agent. You do not have any longer the ability to act as a black man or as a woman. Because if you were to say something like this, I produced this effect as a woman, immediately you're saying that women will produce this effect, that a woman can do this. If you say, me, Maggie, Maggie produced an effect, that's fine. If you say, as a CEO, I produced this particular effect, that's fine. But the moment you say that as a woman, I produced this effect, well, now all hell breaks loose. You're saying, well, not all women do that. You can't say that. Women don't necessarily produce that effect. That would be wrong. You simply cannot you cannot say anything like that. That would create a standard. And in this way, the only way that they can affirm themselves is to see how society shapes their identity. Think of it this way: I'll say I'm a woman, or I'm black, and I can't affirm my own identity, but I know I exist. I'm black. So what happens? Well, I can't prove I'm black. I can't produce any of my own actions. So the only way that I can frame my existence as being black, I can see some some way that it exists is by virtue of my experiences. I'm not responsible for those experiences. Those experiences come to shape me, right? They'll say, I experienced this as a black man is another way of saying I experienced this because other people targeted me as black. And furthermore, I am irresponsible for my actions in that circumstances. At most, I'm simply reactive. Does that make sense? Does that follow logically?
So that corresponds to the language of liberation. And there's another word, subjugation. We're going to be free from subjugation. So within the Evergreen language, or within the language that's being used by the young people at Evergreen, there's a big push for liberation. We need to liberate ourselves from this thing. So I see that what you're saying is that act of liberating is the only mode of power that can use a solid, defined category in the process of shedding the category. So I need the category insofar as it allows me to shed the category, and the category is made stable not by anything I positively do, because the category doesn't actually exist. The category is a category of oppression. So the only way that it's real is that somebody else made it real by a negation of my freedom from that category. So I'm using that category that I inhabit in order to free myself from the category, and in order to exert my power. So there's still a positive force of claiming power, claiming dominance over other people, especially within the Evergreen situation. It's that this one contingent decided to claim power over the administration, over how the schools run, over the conduct code, and using this terminology of blackness and whiteness in order to accomplish that. But there's still, even in, I'm kind of wandering, and I'm sorry about that, but even in that nebulitization, it can't be a total nebulitization. It can't be total because that would be inherently unsatisfactory, or it's unsatisfactory, because if it's all nebulous, then there's nowhere for those passions to land, and it inherently has to do with exerting power in a positive way, but it's using entirely negation in order to affect that.
So I guess address the points that I think I've interpreted from that. First point is, if they completely nullify it 100%, if they do that, we were talking about this before with political wings. If you are able to manifest the extreme, the absolute consistent principle, it's impossible. You go mad. It cannot be done. Mm-hmm. You cannot it's the idea of completely nullifying your own existence. Mm-hmm. You cannot do it. So there's always a little bit that they hold on to. There's that aspect of it as well. Mm-hmm. Now you're wondering, I think, so even like with all this nebulization, why in the world are they still using these power dynamics, right? Like, why are they trying to, why would you have the, I guess, transsexual black caucus or something like that is trying to exert their will on top of the college? This comes in the form of where their morality is derived from. So I suppose you could look at this as a value structure. I'm not necessarily certain. What it is that nebulization as a process, so tearing down people's standards of different identities and terms and words and things, that makes them, that grants them ethical superiority, moral righteousness, and puts them in the right. That action is literally the only good thing to do. So in this sense, when you see them, like you and I, from how we process information, we're looking at these transsexual black people, and what they've done is they've created this hierarchy of power, and they put themselves on the top. We're seeing it as them being aggressive and oppressive. Of course, they flip it because they believe that by virtue of even having a standard for what their identity is, and so expectations and maybe even intentions for them and who they are, you have oppressed them. They are purely reactive. They cannot see, in the very real terms, they cannot see themselves acting, in this case, as black people. It is only ever a reaction. They cannot take responsibility as a black person because, again, it standardizes things like I mentioned before. So literally everything they do as a black person, or insert something from the progressive stack here, is reactive. Everything is self-defensive. So yeah, we see this as oppressive. We see this as them trying to create this sort of power dynamic, but when in reality, they're just trying to defend themselves.
Well, from their reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. From their reality.
And okay, I have there's one example. There's this prime example of the movement, and they is still a student at Evergreen. So I've tried not to go into this character. I don't know, K. We'll just call him K. So K, who refuses the pronoun that aligns with his physical container. He's male-bodied and yet a femme. I don't know. It doesn't matter. There's all that stuff. I should just keep on going with it.
Right.
But Kay, if you look at his Facebook posts and the speeches that he gives, it's incredibly morbid and it's nihilistic. It's absolutely nihilistic, where he's constantly talking about his death. He's constantly talking about, I want somebody to run me over. When am I going to die? In this inclusion rally thing, he talked about how the average lifespan of a trans black person is 34, and he's 24 now, so he's got 10 years left to live, but he's gonna use those 10 years to like give as much light to the world as possible. Like it's internalized so explicitly and morbidly that it's very difficult to approach that seriously and not say that it's not some sort of mental illness, right? So maybe this individual has a mental illness, histrionic, narcissism, or whatever. I don't know where you go with that because I'm not a doctor, but you could probably do that and match up his behaviors to a certain sort of psychological disorder. But that he's been enshrined within the system, that he's the Ubermensch in the system, that it seems that not only does he have those properties latent in him, but that this entire system of belief has allowed those characteristics to reach their full bloom. And I wonder if it's not somehow exhibiting his behaviors and his morbidity and nihilism aren't exhibiting the core belief system of this nebulization, of this ultimate, what would you say, nullification of I'm not wrong, that every move has to be a move of againstness is the term that I use. I just
yes. No, I mean, you're dead on. Bob posted in the chat, he said, fatalism is a logical conclusion of nebulization. Do you want to expand on that real quick, Bob?
Please, Bob.
Sure. So we'd come up with this concept the other day. I call it, I don't have a permanent name for it, but ideological event horizon is basically the idea here, where your motivations drive your actions, which your goal target is going to be a mirror, is going to try to be as close to your motivation as possible. However, similarly, if you were to say, I'm going to drive my spaceship into a black hole, just because that is your goal doesn't mean you're going to get there. You're going to hit the event horizon, the point in which you can't sustain being, in the same sustaining existence. You can't stay alive at that point. So fatalism, which would be basically just focusing on death, which basically is the complete end of everything for a human, would be the thing that is past the event horizon. So it's thinking of a goal point in which you can't exist any further. You can try to hit it while staying alive, but you can't be alive and dead at the same time. So you're basically just thinking about it, and so the nebulization is basically aiming you at that target. And so if you actually get anywhere near the target, well, you don't exist anymore.
But you.
And so there's a thing that comes before the fatalism, which is basically you no longer function. And that happens at any edge of the ideological map, which basically is any extreme breaks down your ability to function. For instance, anarchy, basically someone's going to kill you, enslave you, something like that. If you go all the way to the right, then humanity doesn't progress. You get an ethno-state where basically anything that's an individual, you get expressions of the individual to its closest ability to stay close to individualism. If you go to authoritarian, everybody is ruled by one guy, and that's like divine command theory, where basically one person wills their wants onto everyone else. That doesn't end well. And the far left basically just ends in crazy town, where people can't function, and the only way that you can actually have it function is through an authoritarian regime, where that's the only way to enforce that kind of insanity, because insanity would basically remains logically consistent.
So can I
okay, go ahead,
riff on that? Because there's another feature of this of the evergreen expression of this value system is that from a professor, there's one professor who's pretty vocal, and he's trying to do propaganda to support what happened, and he constantly talks about everybody being against them, and there's always this talk about the far right and the alt-right and the neo-Nazis are constantly threatening us. They're constantly threatening school. They're threatening academia itself, and it was just a matter of time that they came after Evergreen. So I wonder if the conflict of having an enemy is the one way, like in the extreme case of this ideology, is that you have fatalism on one hand, where you can only ever, when you think of the end state, you just think of just death. So I'm going to think about death. And the only other option at the extreme is thinking of constant war. It's like, well, I don't think about death, but I think that I concretize that fatalism as a threat that's outside of me. So you're still anchored in reality. You're still pointing towards the game board. You're not looking off the game board, which is death. You're still pointing at the game board, but it's still functionally fatalistic, or it ends in violence. And so you have Antifa as the non-nihilistic. Well, it's still nihilistic because it wants to destroy all culture, but you're the manifestation of violence, or the aim of violence, as the only other like ultimate kind of fantasy in this way of thinking.
Yeah, I think you're right on track.
I'd like to introduce something real quick. It might help with the rest of the conversation. So I brought up causality event chain earlier, and it's very useful in understanding these various expressions where their goal is an outcome. So your motivations, you have motivation, action, outcome. There's various forms of this. You could have principle, action, outcome. Doesn't matter. Basically, you have some kind of motivation, idealistic or desire or something at the beginning, and then you have a action in the middle, which is just trying to get to the outcome, and your outcome is where you're hoping your motivation lands you. Now, the thing about this that we have found very interesting is that depending on where you are on the ideological map, the motivations have a goal target, but to get there, you end up taking an action that doesn't exactly match up to what you thought you were going to be doing to get to the outcome. And the outcome ends up being a place that you didn't intend to be. So when it comes to Antifa, for instance, they have a certain goal, but the only way to achieve anywhere near what their goal is, they have to take actions that are antithetical to their motivation, and their outcome ends up being antithetical to their motivation as well. But it's the closest thing they can do to get there. So you end up getting expressions that don't quite match up when you look at it from the outside, unless you understand that they're operating on the causality event chain. Everybody basically operates on this chain, just they look at it slightly differently depending on where you are on the ideological map. So people don't end up doing or getting what they really were aiming for, depending on where you are on the map.
But are there positions on the map that will motivate you to act in a way that your outcome is commiserate with your intention?
Yeah, it's basically centered to somewhere near the right, but if you're too near the right, you end up being stagnant and doing nothing. And if you go past that point, you end up actually pulling backwards. So it's a small range between sort of like a little bit past center left and a little bit left of complete right. So it's within that zone. And if you're in the libertarian zone, you pretty much don't do anything. And if you're authoritarian, you pretty much break the actual motivation. So it's sort of this little zone.
The safe zone.
Yeah, it's the only area that actually ends up functioning.
And what does it produce? What does this zone produce then, politically?
Optimization.
Yeah, it's an optimized state.
Yeah, what it does is it takes, the left is typically, they're in charge of the production of the ideal. What would be better? What would be better for society? What would be the best possible thing?
Yes.
The right is concerned with, we say realism, but it's more of, you can look at it as a pragmatism or a survival instinct.
Iteration.
Yes, the right preserves what currently works in society and keeps it going, and the left presents the ideals. The center is designed to do, or what it's supposed to do, is to attempt to actualize the ideals of the left and make them operate with regard to like a greater survival. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, and so when the center is able to properly implement these ideas, the right can see that they're more efficacious, that they're better, and so then the right ends up adopting those. And then over time, the right takes those as their traditions because they're better. That's the new way of doing things. And this is where you get the shift in the Overton window, right?
Yeah.
Over time, where everything tends to move more left because the center is able to manifest the ideals of the left and the right adopts them.
Yeah. I have a great example, and Vandal sort of gave me the idea of how to say it.
Okay.
We're going to just go with the left, right, center dichotomy for right now. The three farmers. So the person on the right, that farmer, he grows the crop the same way every year because he knows that it works. He's not interested in changing anything. His son, his friends, his families are like, can we please try something different? And he's like, no, this has always worked. It worked. If it isn't broke, don't fix it. So the guy on the far left, he's like, I really want to try something different this year, and he plants a completely different way the entire farm, and he fails the entire crop. Now, the person in the center is like, well, that guy on the left, he seems like he has an idea, but I also don't want to die, so I'm going to plant a test patch over here where I can get away with it, and if it fails, no harm, no foul, and then I can take that method and make it my full crop next year, and then just keep doing trial and error.
So a conservative progressivism.
Yeah. It's nesting idealism inside of realism.
And there's an interesting parallel in the scientific method, from the way I see it. The left is responsible for hypothesis, the creativity, an idea, a new way of doing things, a better way of doing things. And then the right represents your control group, and the center represents a test group. And if the test fails, they can go back and they can keep operating on the control group the way it used to work, and they try something again. So that is the dynamic between the left, the right, and the center.
Okay.
The left comes up with the new ideas, the right maintains everything, and the center attempts to integrate those ideas.
And on the vertical axis between authoritarianism and liberalism, what's the optimal relationship between them?
Well, you have to be beyond. You have to be in the. That's what I was trying to say. It's a small zone, and that you have to have a slightly authoritarian twist to it, Because if you don't, you're going to remain stagnant. You're not going to try to do any movement at all.
You need an executive.
Libertarian is, you have to have some kind of executive order kind of thing. Because otherwise you're just like, well, I don't believe I should try it or push it on anybody, so I'm just going to do nothing. I have a belief, but I'm not going to execute on it. Whereas if you're in the authoritarian zone, you are executing it to some degree. Now, the full-on execution is like, we all must try this. Whereas just a little bit, it's like, we should try this, but let's not go overboard about it. So then you have some kind of spectrum in between, in terms of intensity.
And you get this interesting shift when it comes to matters of just singular ideas. Wherein, if you were to take a single idea that everyone in the West accepts as true and enforces it, that singular idea could be considered on the right. It is now the tradition. Everyone thinks it's okay. This is how we need to do it. And it's authoritarian because it's entirely enforced. It's just one idea. That single idea could be the concept of law. Right? So, the enforcement, when you see it in a macro scale, with all these different outcomes and the way the government is acting over time, then you can say it's more of a libertarian government, it's more of a this, more of a that. But the concept of having a law is so entrenched, it's an authoritarian position, insofar as belief is concerned.
And why do you think that there's been an eruption of, diversity and equity and Evergreen and all these colleges and Google and Twitter?
Now, the reason why you see this push toward this ethic of diversity, that diversity is this good thing, it goes right back into nebulization. Because if you are a person who standardizes things, set a standard for what this is, who is the best at that, what exactly it means to be a woman, it creates these necessary particulars, right? Like men are better at this, or men should be in this role, women should be in that role, so on and so forth. In the attempt to break that standard, which has now become like a social standard, especially like in the 1950s, something like that, in order to break it, you need to eliminate discrimination. And what I mean by discrimination is I don't necessarily mean the prejudicial, bigoted version. I mean the literal version of discrimination, which all it means is differentiation, establishing a distinction via criteria. So that's the bad thing. Discrimination, when they say the words discrimination, what they mean is standardization. So it goes right back into nebulization. They're trying to resist it because their moral ethic, their code, is embedded in the process, the behavior of nebulization.
I still don't understand if it really is nebulization. I keep on adding an extra syllable. If it really is, then why is it about race? Why is race the thing that's being landed on? Why do we need more black, queer, disabled women in tech?
So I can sort of give an answer to this. It is a form of it is a resultant of the nebulization, because when you nebulize the standards for what people are, you end up basically doing a reduction of what things mean to the minimum viable existence, which basically is as close to that ideological event horizon that I was talking about. It's basically the point in which you cannot go any further, so you must operate within the zone in which you can actually sustain the ideology.
Okay.
Because if you go any further than that, you just have no functionality.
Okay.
So reducing everything to a aesthetic category is basically as simple as you can possibly
It's the most
get it.
nebulous real thing there is.
Yes, and that's a perfect way to put it, because imagine them trying to nebulize the identity of a plumber. So now you can walk around as a fashionista with a lightsaber on your belt, climbing up skyscrapers, and then you say, okay, yeah, I'm a plumber.
Yeah.
How? You need to fulfill the role, the expectation.
Oh, okay.
But it's not there anymore. Because that's why they go for these aesthetic categories, because, they used to be standards, but they're not roles anymore.
You guys are brilliant. You guys are great.
You get a click?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So earlier you said something that really struck with an example that we had talked about before.
Yeah.
And it fits right into this. You said that the people were very upset at color blindness, conceptual
Yeah.
color blindness.
Yeah.
And so, and what you had said is exactly what we had theorized and talked about, which is basically they feel that if there is no line between black and white, which is basically the next step in nebulization of an aesthetic category, is basically just removing any differentiation between the aesthetic categories. They all become one. That then means that black and white aren't the same, that aren't different. They are just now people. And so that is basically a breakdown all the way to the right, which turns everybody into an individual.
Yeah.
And they don't like that
Collapse.
because of what I was saying earlier and what I was going to get to again, which is people operate on optimization. Now, if you're optimizing and you have a cost-benefit analysis, the best scenario, the most optimized scenario for an optimization, for a cost-benefit, is no cost, all benefit. Now, if you can get real close, you're going to do that. But as soon as it breaks down where it reverts to you don't get anything, then that is your stopping point. That's where you say, nope, can't go any further because this destroys everything. So that's why you end up with this most operable nebulous position.
You know what? I have to say this as a critique of what you guys are doing, that
Go ahead.
I really like it because it allows me to criticize or critique this behavior in good faith and not say these people are evil or they're bad actors. It's like, no, that they are. It's very generous to
Right?
Yes.
people who are acting in a manner that doesn't align with my valuation system. So I like that. It's finally it's providing justification where I was having a hard time.
It begins to neutralize the moral content that you have based on the way you process information. Right? If you're on the, like, say you're the alt-right, you look at someone on the left, like they're evil, they're immoral, they're like jerky bastards or something like that. But if you're able to develop this perspective where you're kind of straddling the line and understanding the way they justify their beliefs, then you can be neutral. Finally, you could be neutral about it.
That was one of our real things that we wanted to do with this, as well as it's not just a communication, but to understand that everybody is operating on what they believe to be the true reality.
Yeah.
Everybody's perception has a reason why it is their perception. So it is very upsetting to say from anybody's position that anybody else's position is just wrong because you disagree with it. And I'm going to say that, yes, the left's positions for the most part can be discredited through science. However, that doesn't really get down to the nitty-gritty, which is, why are they behaving this way? They have to have a reason for behaving this way. Yeah. And what we also were able to do with this is say, okay, well, conservatives and centrists and classical liberals, they're not super crazy for the most part. But the alt-right is getting a bit nuts on that end, and generally has been throughout history, as a persistent ideological position. So using this framework, we can understand all of the extremes and why they do what they do, and be able to talk to the people, break down the subjects, and help people see reality for what it really is.
Yes.
And not have to bring in this moral justification kind of crap.